Hello YouTube. In this video we're going to talk about stretching and warming up for bodybuilding. So this video was requested by Danielle, but I think it's something that everyone can benefit from. And if you're advanced, if you already know those terms, stick around because I'm going to sneak some information in there that I think can be beneficial and open your eyes on some new horizons and training principles that you might not be aware of. So we're going to start with stretching. I played sports for 5 years. I trained for those sports for 5 years, and therefore I did a ton of stretching, and it was mostly static stretching before and after practice. Anyone who's played football, anyone who's played soccer, basketball knows that you get in a circle with the guys and you do some static stretching. Do I still do it? I used to when I started lifting. Why? Because my practice of sports translated into my practice of lifting weights. The same habits were transferred in a way. Do I still do it? No. Why? I think it's a waste of time. I really believe that stretching before training does nothing. I also believe that it can be detrimental. I think it can take away from your performance. I also believe that it's an injury risk. Why? What do you do when you stretch? You are stretching tendons and muscles, meaning that you are elongating them, but they're cold. What happens when you squat or you do a deadlift and you get injured? You overextended something that snapped. You're doing that right now, stretching, and you're cold. This is the reason why people tell you to warm up before you lift, because you want the muscles to be nice and full of blood so that they're elastic and they don't just snap, which is gonna happen if you stretch too aggressively. I've seen that happen. People who tore hamstrings trying to touch their toes to get more flexible. So I would advise you to not do it. And based on my experience, the difference I had between when I stretched before training and when I didn't was nothing. Nothing happened. I didn't get injured more afterwards. I wasn't losing strength. I wasn't losing reps on my work sets. Nothing happened. The only thing that it did is that it saved me time. Now, if you are very particular about a certain stretch you like to do before a certain lift, do it. If you like it, do it. But I would say if you are like me and you like to stretch before lifting, give it a try. Don't stretch for 2 weeks and see what happens and assess from there. What about stretching after lifting? And we're talking about static stretches here. After lifting, it's a different story. Why? You're warm, meaning that your muscles are not going to be as susceptible to injury. And in that case, you can stretch. And back in the days, same thing. I used to have a complete routine of stretches. I would go like this and like this. I stopped doing most of that. Why? Because I didn't feel the need. The only stretches I still do are for my hip flexors. Why? The job I work requires me to sit for long periods of time, which most office workers are going to be able to relate to, meaning that I have very tight hip flexors, and it can become a potential issue because it's going to damage my ability to lift, to do squats, deadlift, etc. And it can also create issues elsewhere because yes, you can get a hip injury because the flexors are too tight, but it can also impact your lower back, for example. Why? Because everything works in a chain. So if one link of the chain is weak, it can also put more strain on another chain that's going to be damaged. I will make plenty of videos about that topic. There's also the fact that certain exercises are going to make that worse. For example, hanging leg raises make tight hips worse. So I want to stretch after I'm done training to release some of that tension, and I personally find that it works. So I keep doing it. And when I don't do it, when I get lazy on it and I don't stretch my hips for like a week, I feel it. I feel it getting tighter. So it's something I do. That's static stretching. What about what people call dynamic stretching? Well, dynamic stretching is movement. And that's something, if you played sports, you also did. You did movements, you did knee raises, all of that good stuff to get the blood flowing. And I think that's valid. It should be done before training. But there is an easier way to do it. And this is where we segue into warming up. Warming up is dynamic stretching. Grab a bar, grab weights, and pump your body. And the easiest way to do that is to do the exercise you're going to be doing with less weight. So for example, you're going to bench press. Start with an empty bar, do 30 reps, and then move on to 25 on each side and do 20 reps, and then 45 on each side, 10 reps, etc. The jumps in weight are completely your own. I used to know people who would start with 135 on the bench. I don't. Why? Because when I used to do that, I had, it wasn't torn, but I had a bad pec injury because I didn't warm up and my chest just doesn't work that way. So I had a bad experience with that, and I was very afraid that I was going to need surgery, and thankfully it wasn't severe enough. It recovered by itself. But now, even though I can bench in the 200s, I always start with an empty bar, and then I slap 25s on, and then I do between 25 and 30 reps with a 135 just to get the blood flowing. And yes, this is going to pre-fatigue the chest, but if you're a bodybuilder and not a powerlifter, doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I don't want to talk too much about that because I'm going to get into the topic of tonnage and quality tonnage and jug volume. I'm going to define those principles later. Just so you know, what matters when you warm up is to get warm. So you're going to have to do what it takes to get warm. Same for the squat. You squat with whatever you want. I squat in the high 300s. I still put 25s on that bar when I start. Why? I want to get warmed up. Deadlift, I start with 135. Why? Because I never had issues with my lower back, so I don't have to. Apply your principles in relation to your own body and what it can take and what it cannot take. After that, if you need some prehab before you do a warm-up, some people don't like to jump into a bench press because their shoulders hurt. You can do some chest activation with a band, you can do some shoulder warm-up with a plate, whatever you want. I used to do that. I stopped. Why? Because I don't need it. I realized I can just jump into the empty bar and it's the same. So I adapt. I gain time. And bodybuilding, you get to a point with natural bodybuilding where your body needs so much volume to grow that any 10 minutes you can get here and there is critical because it's going to represent 2 extra sets of quality work. So this is pretty much that for the topics of stretching and the topics of warming up. I know that some people like to warm up doing cardio. I personally don't see the benefits of that. If you like to do it. But for me, just doing the lift and ramping up in weight is plenty to warm up. I also advise you start with lots of layers. If you start with a hoodie on and you're going to break a sweat by the time you get to your working sets, which means your body is going to be nice and warm. Apparently in older lifters, it takes more time to warm up, and your body's ability to warm up is going to depend on your particular quirks. Personally, warming up for squats, warming up my knees and my back for squats takes a long time. Some people can just jump into their sets and be completely fine with it. For me, it's deadlift. I can just jump into my sets. Apply that to make sure that you prevent injury. And it also is going to have an importance and impact on your programming. Why? Well, because if warming up for squats takes 45 minutes, you might not want to squat every day because that's going to be a massive waste of time. Those are things we're going to talk about in the hypertrophy series. But for this video, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Let me know in the comments what you think. What are your preferred methods of warming up, stretching, if you believe in static stretching. Some people don't believe in it. And as far as the topics of mobility, especially robust mobility, go, they deserve their own video. So we'll talk about that later. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.